Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. In today's show, we're going to discuss the United Nations, as well as specifically the arms embargo that's in place on the Islamic Republic of Iran at this point in time. The United States has made a legal argument, specifically that is of the Secretary of State, that the U.S. is still a participant of the Iran nuclear deal. Now, for many of us around the world, that doesn't make sense because you remember that in 2018, the U.S. did walk away from that deal and made a very big deal to publicly and formally announce that it was walking away from the Iran nuclear deal. Donald Trump not agreeing, of course, with the deal that Obama came to with the Islamic Republic of Iran. Nevertheless, the details, when you look at them, are not as simple as saying the U.S. is not in fact part of the deal, because UN Security Council Resolution 2231, in fact, the U.S. is still very much a part of, and it can possibly argue in that regard that Iran is not living up to its commitments, and by default, certainly the U.S. is also not living up to its commitments. So this entire thing could possibly fall apart. What then happens to the arms embargo? There are details about that too, which are very interesting, which will no doubt come up in our discussion. Now, we're joined by two esteemed guests. One of them is joining us from Vancouver, Canada, is Pouyan, who is a research fellow at the Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. We're also joined from Tehran by Mohammad Soltaninejed, who is an assistant professor of Middle East Studies at the University of Tehran. Mohammad and Pouyan, thank you both for your time today. Pouyan, let me start with you. What do you make of Pompeo's argument that the U.S. is still very much a participant of the nuclear deal? Certainly, I mean, we know Trump does not like the deal, but it seems now they're trying to have both sides, right? They're trying to sort of gain an advantage by also trying to limit Iran's ability to buy arms, but at the same time continue maximum pressure.
Thank you for having me. Well, look, there are two arguments to be made here. The United States ceased to be a participant of the JCPOA the day that it decided to exit the agreement. If we look at President Trump's speech on the day of the withdrawal, President Trump clearly states that we are exiting the agreement, not just violating it by reimposing unilateral sanctions, but exiting the agreement altogether. That would be the first argument that Russia, China, and other signatory members of the agreement will try to make in fall when the U.S. is expected to invoke the snapback clause. The other argument is that this snapback clause was designed based on the presumption that Iran would be the first violator. It was introduced by the French, and it was designed based on this assumption because the West was very much distrustful of Iran. And they assumed that Iran would be 100% the first violator. And the day that the United States announced that it was withdrawing, this was a shock to many. And this was very interesting because Iran was expected to be the first violator. Now, in this case, it is very interesting. Once the United States withdrew, Iran resorted to Article 36 of the agreement. Yeah. Based on Article 36, if the United States or any other power ceases to commit to certain commitments within the agreement, Iran or any other power again reserves the right to reduce its commitments in a partial, gradual pace. And that is exactly what Iran did. So the first argument would be that the U.S. is no longer a participant. Okay. And the second argument would be that it was not Iran that violated the agreement first. It was the United States that violated the agreement first. And Iran resorted to an internal mechanism within the deal to enact this partial withdrawal. And I think Europeans and other significant members have a strong case down in fall.
All right, Mohammad, what's on that? Because it's a bit confusing for a lot of us, right? So we're following the deal as it is, and then there's also seemingly, at least that's the way I'm seeing it, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems that the deal is one thing and then the UN Security Council Resolution 2231 is a separate thing. What does that then mean for Iran itself vis-a-vis the arms embargo, do you think?
Thank you for having me. I think we have to pay close attention to the fact that we have to take the integrity of the whole agreement between Iran and the great powers into account. Actually, the agreement that was signed between Iran and the great powers was in the form of the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that was upholded by a United Nations resolution. And these two are interlinked, and you cannot separate them from each other. Yes, legally, the United States, according to the resolution that we just referred to, is a part of the deal. But the point is that the United States has explicitly announced that it has exited the deal. The United States has not lived to its end of the bargain according to the deal. So these are the things that are very contentious in the eyes of the Iranians. And Iran has time and again announced that if the United States is a party to the deal, it should remain committed to the deal and just live up to its end of the bargain. But what we have seen here has been a utter violation of the deal by the United States. And actually, this has been designed by the Trump administration. Actually, Trump administration, a day that they just exited the deal, they declared that Iran has done things that in the United States' eyes are seen as not in agreement with Iran's pledges and Iran's commitments to the deal, but it wasn't actually the case. There was no harmony between what Trump said and the realities on the ground. And these all were actually aimed at reaching two objectives. The first one would be that the United States apply pressures on Iran, resume its unilateral sanctions against Iran, would sabotage Iran's cooperation with the other countries and other parties to the deal so that Iran would not benefit from the deal as it was expected, and in the hope that Iran would do things that come to contrast or to full and utter disagreements with Iran's commitments according to the deal that would be considered violation of the deal. And I think from the beginning Iran was mindful about that. Iran acted prudently and wisely. And whatever Iran has done so far has not been violation of the deal. Iran has just reduced its commitments to the deal so that it would deprive the United States from the instrument of arguing that Iran has violated its commitments and now it's time for us to reimpose all sanctions against Iran, the UN sanctions, the EU sanctions, and etc. So I do think that from an Iranian standpoint, the critical thing is that the United States, if it is a party to the deal, if it claims that it's a party to the deal, it should implement its commitments.
Okay, so Pouyan, if it's realistic, right, the U.S. can still make life very hard for Iran at the UN Security Council because of its veto power and because of the way that Resolution 2231 is even designed, right, when it comes down to the fine print and the details. Do you think that for the Iranians, that the arms embargo and the snapback, just the threat of that, would possibly force them to try to possibly come to some sort of an agreement or an understanding with the Americans? I mean, is that even on the table at this point?
I don't think so. The thing here is that the Iranians, I think, know that the United States is in a way provoking Iran to leave the agreement altogether. This goes beyond the arms exports, the halt of arms exports to Iran. This also has to do with Iran potentially withdrawing from the agreement altogether in response to this. And I don't personally think that Iran would negotiate, but I, at the same time, don't think that Iran would withdraw from the JCPOA altogether prior to November, because the US presidential election is very much important to Iran. At the same time, Iran can take a number of steps. Now, what Iran will do will depend on what other council members will do in response to US invoking the snapback clause. If other members respect the United States' decision to invoke the snapback clause, if other members see these new sanctions as UN sanctions, then Iran will take matters into its own hands, I believe, and will resort to options that might really escalate tensions. It can increase uranium enrichment back to 20%. It can ask IAEA inspectors to leave Iran. It can potentially withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, the NPT. It can take a number of steps, but it will depend on how other council members react to the United States. Because if the United States unilaterally invokes the snapback clause, other members could come out and say that we don't respect these sanctions. We don't believe that the UN sanctions are in fact reimposed. And that will be a legal argument that will be had. Yeah. But I think Iran's response will depend on how other UN Security Council members respond to the United States decision.
Mohammad, I wonder, from the Iranian point of view, what is the point of staying in the deal as it currently stands? Because, you know, the sanctions are very much still in place. The U.S. pressure still continues. You know, it keeps upping up the ante, doesn't it, when it comes to Iran? Why are the Iranians still within this? And I imagine there are voices within Iran which would want Iran to walk away from the deal as well?
Yes, you're right. There are voices here that just demand the government to just get out of the deal, but they're not like the strongest here within the political spectrum in Iran. Because what would be the end result of Iran's exit from the deal? Iran's nuclear program was designed to serve peaceful purposes, and it was not a way to just get Iran a bomb or something like that. So based on this, and as this is not Iran's end objective, Iranians are not taking seriously the arguments for them to exit from the deal. Just add to that the reality that to be a part of the deal has brought Iran a strong international legitimacy. Iran's arguments are accepted within the international organizations, national settings. Iran has been able to cooperate with the European countries, at least in minimum levels. The insects have brought some minimal fruits. Iran has worked with China to export oil, and it is said that it could be said that after all, Iran has a high moral ground here, and so this international recognition matters for Iran. And the exit from the deal would not just bring Iran any meaningful leverage at this moment. Iran has been careful to design some leverages for itself, so that the Europeans and the Chinese would work with Iran, but they have been in a way that would not send the message that Iran is violating the deal. And Iran looks at the upcoming presidential election in the United States to see what would be the result if a liberal candidate would win the election and the next president of the United States, if it's a liberal one, there is a good chance that there can be other negotiations between Iran and the United States, and through some sort of recognition, Iran can have these sanctions lifted, and things could change dramatically. Okay. But all in all, such a scenario for now, Iran is just insisting on its own internal capabilities. Iran has abundant resources and has been able to withstand the United States pressures, and will continue to do so until the next presidential election in the United States, regardless of what would be the reaction of other countries to these initiatives of the United States administration. And there is a big chance that Europeans and Chinese and Russians, they would not just get on board with the United States scenario of pushing Iran out of the nuclear deal, NPT, and etc.
Pouyan, you know, in 2020, the world is very different from when this deal was signed back in 2015, right? We've had a lot that's happened in these years, especially since the U.S. walked away from the deal. You know, we've had those oil tanker attacks. We've had the attack on the Saudi Aramco. We've had just coronavirus happening. We've had the Soleimani assassination. A lot has happened. The world has changed. Do you think that the Iranian calculations have also changed as well as the Western calculations towards each other? And then what does that then mean for this deal? I mean, is this really a very viable deal going forward, or would there at some point in time, if this deal survives, need to be a negotiation for further deals?
Well, I think the world certainly changed after the assassination of General Soleimani. And for Iran, I think there is no going back with regards to negotiations, with possible negotiations with President Trump. I don't think there will ever be a Rouhani-Trump handshake after what happened in January. And in addition, Iran is following a fairly consistent policy. It is partially withdrawing from the agreement. It is maximizing its resistance campaign against U.S. interests in the region. Since Trump has withdrawn from the agreement, it hasn't taken any sudden steps. It hasn't been very harsh in its response. It has followed a very consistent and partial, gradual path because it is waiting for November, in my opinion. November might be a turning point if President Trump loses the election. But that remains to be seen. And I think it will be only after the U.S. election where Iran will decide if it should negotiate or not.
All right, before I let you both go, let me give the word to you, Mohammad. In this hypothetical scenario that Trump wins in November, what does that then look like for U.S.-Iran sanctions after that? Do you think that even at that point in time, there is room to come to some sort of a working relationship?
Yes, I think if that scenario just comes true and Trump will win the presidential elections, there have been meaningful ramifications here in internal politics in Iran. I do think that here the conservative bloc would have the upper hand, and there is a big chance that they would just win the Iranian elections. And then you would have two conservative blocs, both in Iran and the United States, and actually they are using similar rhetorics. So there is a big chance that the Iran-U.S. relations would worsen even more after Trump would win the elections. There have been some leverages over Iran by the next U.S. president, but the point is that the resistance discourse within Iran would be strengthened so much, and Iran would be more reliant on its internal resources and some other alternatives it has internationally to cope with the United States. So I think it would be a prolonged process of escalation and de-escalation in the future, and I do not think that Iranians would compromise suddenly, and there would be some sort of a comprehensive negotiation between Iran and the United States whatsoever.
Very well. We'll leave it with now Mohammad and Pouyan, and of course appreciate their time today. Pouyan, they're speaking to us this morning from Vancouver, and Mohammad speaking to us this afternoon from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Viewers, I'll be back after this break. We're going to continue the conversation about this because there's a lot more to discuss when it comes to this arms embargo, the possibility of snapback sanctions upon the Islamic Republic. I'll be back right after this break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar Rizvi. We're continuing the discussion right now on the United States threatening Iran, essentially, over the arms embargo, saying that it wants an indefinite extension of the arms embargo and will present and has presented a resolution at the United Nations Security Council in that regard. We're also going to be talking about the snapback mechanism within the JCPOA, as well as the sanctions, and, of course, where this leaves the JCPOA and the Iran nuclear deal at this point in time. Let's discuss this now with Hamidreza Gholamzadeh, who is a foreign policy expert. He's joining us now from the Iranian capital, Tehran. Joining us from London is Farhang Jahanpour, who is a part-time tutor at the Department of Continuing Education at Kellogg College at the University of Oxford. Farhang and Hamidreza, thank you both for your time today. Farhang, let me start with you. What do you make of Mike Pompeo's legal argument that the U.S. is still a participant of the JCPOA? I mean, of course, the U.S. made a very big deal, as you well know, in 2018 of walking away from the deal. But the U.S. argument is that it's still very much a party to the UN Resolution 2231, in which then, of course, we have that snapback mechanism as well.
Well, what comes clearly to mind due to this kind of claims is having your cake and eating it at the same time. As you know, the snapback part was introduced when they were discussing the final phases of the JCPOA, the nuclear deal, because there was a lot of opposition to it in Congress and in various circles in America and also by Israel. So President Obama agreed that they would include this clause of a snapback, so that if Iran violated the deal, then the members could ask for a snapback. What the United States has done, not only violated the deal itself in 2018 by withdrawing from it. I mean, in fact, withdraw is the wrong word, because there is no such mechanism in the agreement to withdraw. He basically reneged upon it. He violated it. So that it's not only he has gone against the deal itself, there was a resolution 2231 passed unanimously by the Security Council and endorsed by all the 5 members, permanent members of the Security Council, plus Germany, as well as by the European Union, saying that all sanctions had to be lifted on Iran. And of course, US, the United States, violated that too and imposed very crippling sanctions, which are still continuing, and they pride themselves. So really, from a legal point of view, from a moral point of view, they have absolutely no legs to stand on. They will bring discredit upon the international law. They have done already a great deal of harm. If they don't stop this nonsense, I think they will pass, they will go, but the harm which will be done to US reputation will always remain.
You know, Hamid, the U.S. is still very much a powerful country, right, especially at the United Nations. It can still make life very hard for Iran, especially then when it comes to the arms embargo, because that seems to be, at least on the face of it, according to Mike Pompeo, the main concern right now for the Americans is that this arms embargo be extended indefinitely, really. How important a factor is that for the Iranians?
So, well, it's very important for Iran to have access to arms deals in terms of exporting the weapons that it is creating and also buying more advanced weapons that it needs for the defense of the country. But the point is that the reason that the Americans are rushing into raising the issue in the United Nations Security Council is that it shows actually that they don't have that enough power that they need for that. In a few months, we are going to have Russia as the president of the Security Council and the United Nations. And while we are going to have in May Estonia, and next couple of months, American allies are going to be presidents of the United Nations and heading the Security Council. And so the Americans are actually rushing into that because they want to do everything they can before the Russians actually get the power and get the war in the United Nations. So, and the other point, as Farhang just said, is that they are making an argument which is actually totally wrong, and they are using the United Nations wherever meets their interests, and they are ignoring and weakening the United Nations wherever it is against their own wills. So they are ignoring the considerations of the 2231 resolution, removing the sanctions. They kept all the sanctions. They imposed more sanctions, more crippling sanctions, as they call it. Yeah. And yet they want to use the same mechanism. President Trump said that they are ceasing participation in the deal, and they are now calling themselves participants to the nuclear deal. Yeah. So they are talking totally contradictory, and they are making an argument which is false from the very beginning at its core, and they know that they don't have enough chance to win it in the international scene.
All right, so you know, a lot has happened, right? Even just since the U.S. walked away from the JCPOA, right? We've had the Qasem Soleimani assassination, we've had the attacks on the oil tankers, we've had the attack on Saudi Aramco, we've had now coronavirus and COVID-19 and the realities that that brings to the world that we're all living in, but especially more so for Iran because of sanctions, because of the pressure that's been placed on it. How does that, do you think, change the calculations when it comes to this deal? Does that make the Iranians more willing, more vulnerable even, to possibly give in to some American demands at this point?
Well, there's absolutely no question that the sanctions have had a very terrible effect. Iranian economy is in very bad shape. And of course, the coronavirus has also added to the complications. But the aim of the Americans right from the start of their so-called maximum pressure was to bring Iran to its knees. In fact, both Pompeo and other members like John Bolton and so on said it, that their aim ultimately was regime change, but if not, at least to force the Iranian government to come to the table and agree to an agreement which the Americans wanted. Now, one thing which is certain is that despite all the problems, Iran has not come to its knees. Iran has not given in to American demands, and it is unlikely that it will do so within the next few months too. So as Alireza said, what they are really demanding is totally nonsensical. In fact, in a telephone conversation between Iranian Foreign Minister Zarif and the Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov, they called these demands delusional. Yeah. And Russia emphasized that they are willing and able to sell arms to Iran, and no amount of manipulation can change that. The fact of the matter is America is still a very powerful force. Of course, COVID is taking a very big toll on them too, and their economy is in a very, very bad shape. But there is a limit to how much a superpower can achieve without legality and without the help and cooperation of other major powers. In this case, it does not have the cooperation of any country, including its allies in Europe, Britain, Germany, and France.
You know, Hamid, I wonder, what is right now, at this point in time, keeping the Iranians within the deal? I mean, what is the motivation on the part of the Iranians to remain in this deal, considering, you know, over and over again it's been proven that the Iranians are not getting as many benefits off of this deal as, of course, they themselves wanted and as outlined within this deal. And, you know, within the reality that we're living in now, where Iran has seen the world change so much since that deal, since 2015, when that deal was signed, you know, what logic is there to even remain in this at this point in time?
You know, the only benefit that the JCPOA had for Iran was that it showed that Iran is a rational actor and it is not seeking a nuclear weapon and is totally ready to actually abide by the deal that it has made. So Iran showed its commitment to prove all these things, to say that there is nothing political wrong about Iran, and Iran is not seeking and pursuing any nuclear weapons, and all the program is totally peaceful. So it was a proof to that. And now, especially in the last couple of years, last 2 years, let's say, because we are next week is the anniversary of President Trump's withdrawal from the deal. So all these 2 years, Iran has actually seized the opportunity to prove that the Americans are not trustworthy. They are not committed to the deal. And on the other side, Iran is actually committed to that. And from last year, Iran decided to push back from withdraw from some measures gradually in response to lack of commitment from other sides, particularly the United States, which withdrew from the deal, and also the Europeans, which did not actually do anything serious. Even the index mechanism that they were creating was nothing fruitful. And so Iran tried to step back and withdraw from it gradually to give opportunity to the other side to take something practical, to take some steps and measures which are practical and working for Iran. So that's the mindset behind that inside Iran, that we can show our rationality, we can show that we are on the right side of the story, and that the others actually need to take some actions. We are taking our actions. Even the withdrawal and with the measures that we are taking in response is based on the JCPOA and in reaction to what the others are doing, but not by not doing actually what they are supposed to do. So that's why Iran is still in the JCPOA.
You know, Farhang, at this point, we've had the Russians saying just, you know, in the past day or so to Iran, don't give in to U.S. provocations. And of course, provocations, we can define that in many ways. But it seems that, you know, one of the reasons possibly, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that Iran is being so patient is that a lot of people are holding with bated breath to see how the elections at the end of this year work out for the Americans, right? And there's hope, I imagine, on the part of many Iranians, especially within the establishment there, that we'll have Biden possibly in office and a Democrat, and the White House would be less harsh towards the Islamic Republic. Is that smart strategy at this point in time to sort of look forward to the elections and hope that Trump will be out?
Well, probably it is part of their calculation, but I suggest that they should not really rely on it because President Trump has shown that he can win against the odds. So he might return again. And of course, they can't change the composition of Congress, which is very hostile to Iran. And Joe Biden, although he's not as hostile as President Trump to Iran, he is not a friend of Iran either. So I think their policy should be a rational, reasonable, calculated policy. But one thing which we have to remember is that, like in the West, Iran too has domestic politics. There was a great deal of opposition to the JCPOA, and there are many powerful forces in Iran saying that Iran did not gain anything from it, although at first, of course, there were jubilation in the streets and everybody became very excited about it, and that Iran should not only withdraw from the deal, but should withdraw from the NPT. Now, if that happens, if there is a new government in Iran which is more hardline than the present one, then really the answer to the international community is either there's going to be a war or they have to accept that Iran will go in a way and a direction which is completely different from what Trump and his supporters are wishing for. Yeah. So I really advise both sides to think rather rationally about the whole issues, put their extreme prejudices to one side, especially in the case of the U.S. President and especially Mr. Pompeo, who has got a terrible hostility, intense hostility towards Iran. I would say almost irrational hostility. He's a diplomat. His job should be able to look for diplomacy, not to try to aggravate the situation. But ever since coming to office, his main aim has been to really make the situation much worse than it was.
All right, so Hamidreza, talk to me then about what your thoughts are about each country's domestic politics, right? Do you think that Biden in office would be better for Iran? And then what if Iranian politics and principalists versus reformists? I mean, we know that there are major differences within the country as well about those even now, I imagine, who would say just walk away from the deal altogether.
In terms of Iran, we are going to have a new parliament in about a month from now, which is mainly principalist MPs. And any further movements, any new deals or any decision to withdraw from NPT or such things would be based on the parliament decision, which is principalist. And they are not, they don't seem to be very hopeful about any difference between President Trump or President Biden, possibly. But inside the United States, there is actually, to me, I cannot see any difference between President Trump or President Biden, because even now that we are discussing an irrational, illogical decision to force the United Nations to put embargo on arms deals forever, you cannot see any opposition from the Democratic side either. They are saying that the President Trump should have not withdrawn from the deal, but they are not saying that it's the wrong decision to do that. They are not. No one is actually criticizing the suggestion to put the embargo, to extend the embargo on Iran's arms deals forever. So they are somehow supporting the idea. So they are against the same thing. And they have already said, Wendy Sherman, John Kerry, and many people who were involved in the negotiations have for several times assisted actually that they did their best to do anything to limit Iran's power, Iran's capability, and Iran's nuclear program. So they couldn't do more than at that time within the JCPOA. But now they welcome any opportunity to do that. So even in the democratic debates, you didn't see anyone saying that they would return to the JCPOA intact and immediately. They are all talking about first talks, first negotiations. They are talking about new ideas and new deals between the two countries, new agreements, and further limits for Iran and further pressure on Iran and such things. So no one actually, neither the Democratic Party nor the Republican Party, are making any difference in that terms. Anyone is not actually, because as a final sentence, President Obama, who actually was the person who signed the deal, and who was a Democratic president, and he was actually the one working with Biden, they did not remove the sanctions based on the deal, so let alone President Trump or President Biden.
Farhang, I'll give you the final. We just have about a minute and a half left. When it comes to provocations, right, I'm going to go back to that Russian statement to Iran. I believe it was the foreign minister possibly who made that statement, telling the Iranians not to fall for the U.S. provocations. You know, right after, I'm sure you remember this as well, after the Qasem Soleimani assassination, the world just waited with bated breath to see how the Iranians would react, right? Even then, the reaction was fairly muted considering how significant and grave that issue was for the Iranians. Do you think that that's how the Iranian policy will be going forward too, or do you think that we are coming closer and closer to a red line for Iran?
Well, I think, and I hope that this will be the case. I think they'll be measured. They have been very measured so far. But I think, again, as a final word to both sides, history has shown, and at least the past 2 years, since Trump withdrew from the agreement, has shown that hostility does not resolve the problem. It does not achieve what they say they want to achieve. I think the United States should find a face-saving way of returning to the deal. And Iran, as there was a great deal of optimism at the beginning, because in fact both Ayatollah Khamenei and President Rouhani said that the deal was not the ceiling, but the base of agreements with the United States. It could become the beginning of further moves in the future. I think both of them should build on that kind of hopeful scenario, try to get together, put an end to this nonsensical hostility, which is not getting anywhere, and try to reach a comprehensive agreement.
Very well. We'll leave it there at that. We appreciate both Farhang and Hamidreza for their time and certainly their insight today. Viewers, we've spoken to 4 guests to try to give you as many viewpoints as possible on this issue. They all agree, though, that the U.S. has walked away from the deal. So for it to now say that it's a participant in the deal is comical. Nevertheless, we all can agree as well that the U.S. is still very much a powerful country, especially considering it holds veto power at the United Nations Security Council, so it can make life a lot harder for the Iranians at the Security Council vis-a-vis UN Security Council Resolution 2231, or even the new resolution that the U.S. has tabled at the Security Council to enforce an arms embargo on Iran indefinitely. What does that mean for the Iranians? What does that mean for the snapback mechanism as well, which would be, of course, of great concern to the Iranians, even though we can all agree that the harsh U.S. sanctions are very much back on and have been back on since 2018 and since Donald Trump walked away from the deal. And then, of course, as all of our guests spoke about, the politics in both respective countries are extremely important. Principalists versus reformists in Iran, and Democrats versus Republicans in the United States. Will Biden win at the end of this year, or will Trump very much stay in office? And then what happens in Iran? Will there then be a reaction in the Iranian side and have much harder and tougher people coming into office? What does that then mean for any possibilities of negotiations in the future? I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.